Hello, everyone. Welcome to Barnes & Noble on the Upper East Side. We are thrilled to have you all here, and we are thrilled to have this panel here. I'm going to take a moment to introduce Susan, and she will be taking it from there. So Susan Shapiro is an award-winning American-born Jewish journalist who has written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Newsweek, the Los Angeles Times, the Boston Globe, The Nation, Salon.com, Daily Beast, Psychology Today, The Forward, and Tablet.
No.
She is the author of 8 books, including Unhooked and Overexposed, and the acclaimed memoirs Lighting Up, Only as Good as Your Word, and 5 Men Who Broke My Heart, which is being made into a movie. She lives with her husband in Greenwich Village, where she is a writing professor at the New School and New York University. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Suzanne Shapiro.
I wanted to thank everybody for coming to the New York City launch of the Bosnia list, which we're really excited about. And the way it's going to work tonight is that I'm going to introduce Kenan Trebinčević, and who's my co-author of the Bosnia list, and he's going to give a little bit of a talk about the book. And then we're very honored tonight that we're joined by our agent and our book editor. Kathleen Nishimoto from WME is here, next to Wendy, the editor from Viking Penguin. So after Kenan gives his talk, I'm going to do a little bit of a Q&A. I know there's a lot of writers here, and we're going to talk a little bit about how the book came about, and then we'll be able to open up for conversation and questions. And do me a favor, there's a lot of empty seats, so if you guys don't mind, since it's such a crowd, would you, there's one up here, Wendy, let more people sit down. So there's a seat right here if anyone wants to. Yeah, there's chairs right there. Yeah, there's some chairs over here. There's a, sir, can somebody sit down there? Yeah. Great, okay, I'm thrilled now to introduce Kenan Trebinčević. He was born in Bridgko in 1980 in a Bosnian Muslim family exiled in the Balkan War. He came to the United States in 1993 and became an American citizen in 2001. His work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, the International Herald Tribune, the Wall Street Journal, Salon, the Best American Travel Writing, and on American Public Media Radio, and NPR, and actually he just won an ASJA award for a great piece he wrote for the Wall Street Journal. And he lives in Astoria, Queens, and works as a physical therapist. Kenan Trebinčević.
Teacher held a rifle to my head when I bumped into him on the street. The woman who lived next door to us stole from my mother. An armed female soldier made my father carry out our chandelier in a wheelbarrow from our apartment to hers. So these kind of haunting memories left me with 20 years of resentment. My name is Kenan Trebinčević. I was born in 1980 in an eastern Ukrainian town called Bridgko. So this photograph was taken in 1986 in celebration of Republic Day holiday, when our favorite teacher, pictured in the top left-hand corner, made our class pledge and swear we would always defend and protect the brotherhood for which our country of Yugoslavia stood for. That day, on the way to school, we were to wear traditional red scarves and blue hats bearing red stars. However, my father stopped me and told me, take the thing off your head. I said, why? All other kids are wearing it too. I said, please do it someday, you'll understand it. My Bosnian Muslim family was exiled in the Balkan War and came to the United States in 1993 when I was 13. I became an American citizen in 2001. At the University of Hartford, I received a degree in physical therapy. Living in Queens, New York, I consider myself a regular guy, more into soccer and Seinfeld reruns than bloodthirsty revenge. Yet the minute I decided to visit my former home, I started having vengeful fantasies of what I wanted to do to my old friends who betrayed me. My memoir, Bosnia List, chronicles my family's escape from the ethnic cleansing campaign that swept the former Yugoslavia, leaving almost 300,000 dead on both sides. So after 2 decades in the States, my father desperately wanted to visit Briscoe again. Being the wonderful father he always been, he never said no to my brother and I. We agreed to take him. But at first, I lied to myself, I'm only doing this for him. But I quickly realized it was time for me to face down my past. So I wrote a list of everything I wanted to do in foreign homeland. Going on vacation for a normal, single, 30-year-old American guy meant partying and romance. However, on my list was visiting graveyards. This is the aftermath of a 7-day battle which took place at the cemetery where my family was buried. Even the dead weren't left alone, because after the battles ended, they brought horses and tractors to dislodge stones from the grounds. They wanted to erase every sign we ever lived. So my father's stone was sliced in half, as you can see at the base, and glued back together, like most of us Bosnians here in the audience. For those of us that live abroad, especially outside of Bridgeko, one of the traditions is to visit the Bosnian Army Cemetery, which is located half an hour south of our town. And we came here to pay respect to fallen men. Following my dad down the aisles, I came across 99 people he knew. Some he went to school with, some he trained, some he coached. My brother Eldon also came across a couple of his old classmates who he finished high school with. The last time I saw Pero, my surf karate coach, he was armed and pointed his skin at me and laughed out loud. I frowned at him and under my breath said, I hope he died. I guess my words did him in because shortly after that, he was shot to death by one of his own. He was 30, the same age I was when I returned to Bosnia. So another item on my list was to stand at Pero's grave to make sure he was really dead. On February 1st of 1990, I received my blue belt, and we took a small class picture with Pero's arms draped over my shoulders. So that was Pero, page 27, and on the next slide, that's Pero in 1993, and that's Pero now. Many angles of the picture were taken, however, I love this picture the most, because in the background I can see the 2 cranes. Those cranes are located in the concentration camp, the same one he took his captors to. So when I saw it and had the picture developed, I told myself, well, Pero didn't finish himself too far away from the camp, but he did have a funeral. I also wanted to find Ranko, a mass murderer and convicted war criminal, to ask him why he kept his word when he told my father, as long as he was one in charge of the camp, nothing would happen to my brother. And being so convenient, I wanted to confront our thieving next door neighbor who stole from my mother's skirt and rug. So this is the old warehouse complex which turned into a concentration camp. Now it's repainted in pink and I call it a dollhouse. Imagine if Auschwitz was open for business, because this place is, and every year they hold some kind of exhibit. On the outside, I've become a normal American teenager who could fit in a pickup game or mall. But beneath the skin, I had never recovered from sudden loss of happy childhood filled with fishing, sledding, swimming, and cookie relatives overfeeding me. My soccer cards were replaced with a bullet and shrapnel collection. So during the war, we had no money. My brother and I played poker with chips. They were not money chips, they were shrapnel chips. 12, when the war hit, my second home, the gym where I studied karate, turned to a slaughterhouse. And the warehouse complex, which I showed you a few minutes earlier, we played hide and seek, turned into a notorious concentration camp where my older brother and father were in prison, where hundreds of civilian Muslim and Catholic men and boys were executed. For 10 months in 1992, we tried to escape. My family was thrown off buses at checkpoints and had guns pointed at us. Back in our barren apartment, we were tormented by neighbors. My old teammates spat and kicked me every time I went outside. I could fight off 2, I couldn't fight off 5. And a neighbor waited for me to carry water filled canister home just to shoot at it and laugh in my face with his teenage daughter and son. I ran families errands since my dad and brother were fighting age, so they had to hide indoors from enemies. And the first time I made a bread run, a bullet nicked my left eyebrow. It took 6 tries and 10 months to flee our town, which became occupied by Serbs. We made out of Bosnia in January 1993, sneaking onto the last bus to Austria in a blizzard. We lived in Vienna as refugees for 10 more months. There, I won a contest in an international Bosnian newspaper, in which I unloaded my hurt and rage on my old teammates, naming them one by one. Several of our family friends in Germany read my article and were able to find us. And then the Interfaith Council of Churches and Synagogues sponsored us to come to the States, and we wound up in Connecticut, foreigners with little English and $300 in pocket. Our version of the American immigrant story was a series of rented apartments filled with donated and mismatched furniture, and a series of jobs for my father, who refused to be on welfare. So for 60 hours a week, he painted houses, bought poultry, Boston chicken, and punched the clock at a food cup factory, while my mother drove herself from chemotherapy she needed to battle with breast cancer. And then the fun part comes. In junior high, I was afraid of big, rich American kids who made fun of my accent, grammar mistakes, and small, skinny frame hidden in the warm clothes I left 4,372 miles. When everyone said, "Hi, Kenan," out loud, I felt like a straight-up inhumane society waiting to be adopted. But luckily, a Catholic Spanish kid named Miguel befriended me. He offered me an empty desk to his right. And at lunch, he shared his tater tots and ketchup, and first American food. He taught me how to play football, baseball, and hockey, which I'd never played before. He was the worst sport I've ever met aside from me. That's your Simon Clancy. He was a toss-up who was a bigger loser. He came to losing. But I felt honored to join a local soccer team, where my teammates guessed the reason I ran everyone was because I had to run away from bullets and dogs. And during the football games, they would tell me to wait for kickoff and just run as fast as I could, pretend the bombs was flying by my head. When we won the NYC championship, I jumped on the back of Coach Papadopoulos, who handed me the trophy with my name engraved. And that was the first time I connected with Coach since Shapiro. When the school bus left me 45 minutes from my home in winter, the kind Israeli bus driver kept me last and drove me home from then on. That was our little secret for the rest of the year. And then Reverend Don Hodges took us to Manhattan to see the Statue of Liberty, but I was too afraid to eat the hot dogs off a cart, since the guy's hands looked dirty to me. At the University of Hartford, a kid across the hall in my dorm ripped me for calling my mom every night. Dude, the whole point of going to college is to escape your family. But he had no idea the real enemies we escaped from, or how much I'm worried my mom would die at 45. Mom's favorite movie was Schindler's List. She rented from a Blockbuster for $1, cried watching it over and over, and say that's exactly what happened to us. And it used to irritate me. I used to ask her, what do Jews in World War II have to do with us? Bosnian Muslims in 1992. I wanted to watch Back to the Future instead. Cars shouldn't fly, she said. There's nothing you can learn from that. She told me we should never forget those who did us harm, but I should always remember the good people too. Even any good deeds that came from anyone. She always wanted to tell her story of survival, but was too sick to do it before she died. She used to tell me to stop bouncing a basketball for once and read a book. Well, she'd be surprised and happy to learn everyone for her dedicated to her. Then 2 years ago, I had a physical therapy patient named Susan. She was a journalism professor and a memoirist. Physical therapy was born to her. She hated the exercises, never paid attention. She had 1,000 questions you don't want to answer. So I walk away, thinking she might do one set correctly. But what she can do is just take another stack of essays from her bag and start grading. So when I jokingly walked over and asked if the assignment was what I did on my summer vacation, she said, actually, the first assignment I gave to my students is to write 3 pages about your most humiliating secret. So I looked at her and I cracked out loud. I said, "You Americans." I said, "Why would anyone reveal that?" She said, "Because it helps you heal, and editors want unusual voices." And that kind of struck me. So that night, I emailed her, see how her back was feeling, and she sent me a piece a female student had just published about how she and her mother, a Holocaust survivor, ate bacon cheeseburgers on Yom Kippur to cope with the anniversary of the suicide of her father. Remembering my Vienna contest that I won, I decided to try. So the first 3 pages I wrote and rewrote, wound up in New York Times Magazine, and later were picked by American Travel Anthology. Susan told me to keep writing, but I told her it's not happening. English is my second language. I studied science, not literature, and I don't have time for it. Then she invited me to a book seminar where I met a WME agent who agreed that we should expand on it. And that's when I approached Susan and asked her to help me with this project. At her suggestions, I tried to write another 3-page flashback scene. And of course, being stubborn, I said, it's not happening, it's too long. But 43 pages came pouring out on me that night. My dad used to say old Yugoslavian history was told by Serbs in Belgrade. The recent books on 1990s Yugoslavian conflict were written by older, acclaimed Western journalists. Susan and I did not want to write another strictly political and academic book. We want to tell a story through the eyes of a 12-year-old boy, juxtaposed with the perspective of a 30-year-old American citizen. But I had another problem. I felt like I didn't have a right to report on the Balkan battle. We didn't lose anyone in the war. I was in a concentration camp. And I wasn't a soldier or war hero. But like my cousin Mirza, who in 1992 was surrounded by 2 tanks and their crew. And he took them out. Later on, he told me that he couldn't hear for a week. So I asked him, how'd you get out of it? He said, dude, the only reason I got there alive is because everyone died of virgin. So now I've got 2 kids and a wife. He's happy. But also I feared my angry perspective might be too young and dark and not dramatic enough. So when I met my Penguin genius book editor, Wendy, she told me she admired my ability to hold grudges for so long. She said she was so good at holding grudges herself that she even held them on behalf of others. So after the event, you guys can walk up to her and she'll embrace it. That's when I knew I was in good hands. I'd like to thank Wendy, Penguin, and everyone here today for listening and caring about my story. I'm still a person who holds a grudge, and resentment would never disappear. Yet, if reliving what happened to me by writing this book with Susan, as you read my book, it helped me see the past with a different set of eyes. I'll always be proud to be Bosnian. I enjoy my double identity and the privilege to be an American citizen. Because here, close friends, colleagues, and family, and mentors have been incessant to my past and supported me. It's because of them I chose a decent path. So I'm beginning to feel more likely to get better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kenan. So now what we'd like to do is I'd like to officially introduce Kathleen Nishimoto, who is at WME, William Morris Endeavor Agency, who sold our book. And Kathleen is an agent who does both fiction, young adult fiction, and narrative nonfiction. And Wendy Wolf, who's the editorial director for nonfiction at Viking Penguin, and she was our editor working on the book. And so what I thought I would do is I'm going to ask them some questions, and then we're going to open it up for questions for you. Now, Kenan, you mentioned that, when I talked about how a lot of my students do first-person essays and memoirs, that you were making fun of us Americans, and this sort of male, macho, Balkan, stoic, never talk about your feelings kind of attitude. And you also told me many times you were very skeptical that nobody in America is interested in my story. Nobody wants to hear it. Nobody cares. So I want to ask you now, after WME and Penguin, you've been in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, most recently BBC, NPR. We were on New York One for 10 minutes last night. So now how does it feel? And has it changed your perspective on opening up and talking about what happened to you?
Well, I've received a ton of emails and Facebook messages over the last 2 weeks of people who can over-identify with the story. And they can always see it, find themselves in the book, and relate to the characters, whether it's a sick parent or just having to move, or forced to move to another state. I never made full sense of how and why we survived. And as I always told you, I felt like a mouse in a maze where every time I came across another story, there was one more roadblock I had to find a way around. So in retrospect, at first I felt like a young victim who lost his happy childhood. By writing the story, I came to understand how amazing lucky we were. And a lot of my friends actually felt bad, telling me, I wish I asked you this 20 years ago when you came, but we knew very little about Bosnia. When I was an adult, they feel like global citizens where they want to know about other countries, and because it does impact them too.
Right, okay, Wendy, I knew about Wendy's books because my colleague Larry Bergreen did a biography, Columbus, The Four Voyages, and I knew when I was in the NBCC we loved Malcolm X, which was a fantastic biography that won the Pulitzer Prize. And you've actually admitted to me that you don't necessarily love memoirs. So what was it when you read Bosnia List, which wasn't sort of a huge biography of somebody famous? What was it that you thought worked for you, that was interesting?
Is this on? How do you turn it on? Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. No, as I'm sort of famous for hating memoir, because I feel like I generally hate the kind of people who write memoirs, which is my limitation as an editor. I always feel you have to, more has to have happened to you than puberty and divorce. So there's some very wonderful books out there about that. But I actually was interested in Bosnia. I had published 2 books about Bosnia. I published a book about the siege of Sarajevo in the newspaper Oslo Virginia, and I had published a book, David Rhodes' book about discovering the massacre at Trebinčević. And so I was one of the people who understood about Bosnia and understood that no one in America understood about Bosnia, or to be honest, gave a shit about Bosnia. Because it had been this, I was fascinated by it because it was a European war. It was a modern genocidal war, smack in the middle of Europe, that most people thought was happening, I don't know, on the other side of Turkey or something like that, to like Kurds or something. And it was just one of those things that I've always held a kind of hope that we could keep doing books that would bring this back to life. So when Kenan's proposal, it was a pretty full manuscript, and not complete at that point, kind of wandered onto my desk with these marvelous blurbs that Susan had gotten from some other writers, and it caught my attention. And there was a freshness in the voice, and that's something that I just can't emphasize too much, is that whatever it is, it takes, the most important thing is that your book be fresh and original and not sound like everybody else's book. And Kenan's book absolutely did not sound like anything else I had read that day or that week. And it immediately grabbed me. So I called his agent and I asked him to come in for a visit, and the 3 of us sat and we talked about the book, and we talked about what else needed to be done with it, where we might go with it, what the limitations of audience were, the challenges that faced us in publishing this book. And auction sometime the next couple of weeks. Then Sandy struck. And I bought this book the day Sandy struck. It was just, I put in a very modest bid, and they all just said, you know what, the apocalypse is coming, we want this contract, let's just do it. And so it was my great triumph from the hurricane. It was the positive thing that I brought out of the hurricane.
And actually, I remember, to sum up your notes, I felt like when we did the first draft, which is about 200 pages, I think the notes we got were basically, this is all fantastic, now just add 100 pages of Yugoslavian history. And, which by the way, you actually gave us such brilliant questions. I remember one of my favorite questions was, you asked Kenan, when was the moment as a kid when you realized you were Muslim, that you were different? And that just led to like this 50-page story that he'd never even told me. But could you talk about that a little bit? Because obviously so you want an American audience to understand the background.
But we need a leader through it. It can't just be a history. It can't, I mean, histories don't work. So there has to be a voice that an American can identify with. And we have a unique situation. Kenan, who is now a kind of all-American guy, lives in Queens, drinks, likes girls, you know, all that kind of stuff. And you know, and then when this story comes out, people's jaws drop and they say, you did what? You came from where? And that was what we needed to capture in the book. We needed to be able for him to establish himself as a reliable narrator that the reader could identify with. You could identify with this 12-year-old kid who is just worried about what's going on. All 12-year-old kids are worried. He actually had something to worry about. And to capture that voice and then have that lead us back into Yugoslavian history, and for him to remember and him to recall how he learned certain things, how he was able to incorporate his own history into his life. And those were the kind of questions that I pushed him on. I think we also had to work on the ending for quite some time, because the book hadn't really come to terms with what I call the big question at the end of almost any book, which is, so what? So what? So what? So what did this trip do? Where are you now? Where's the reader gonna feel at the end of the last page? And we won't spoil it for you, but he landed it.
Great. Now, Kathleen, I see a lot of writers in the audience and maybe a lot of people who want to write books. So as an agent, if you don't mind, could we get some specifics from you? I'm under the impression that if somebody wants to write a novel, if someone wants to publish a novel or a young adult novel, you have to write the whole book the first time. But for nonfiction, you could either write the whole book or you could write a proposal. And could you tell us a little bit about if that's true for you and WME when people approach you, and also what do you think makes a good nonfiction proposal?
Sure. It's very true. For nonfiction, the material that we want to present to a publisher is very different than it is for fiction. And especially for debuts, for fiction you have to have the whole book. There are just so many variables, and you really have to have the whole thing. Wendy was talking about the ending. It's the most important part to a book a lot of times, and so to not have that leaves too many question marks really for the publisher and for the agent. And nonfiction's a different story because how the story begins and ends isn't necessarily a question mark like that. And Kenan's proposal was actually it was very, very, very strong. There's different types of proposals. I've seen proposals that are one paragraph, and I've seen proposals that are 150 pages. It depends on your platform, I guess. That's the word that I actually really hate saying, but it really depends on that.
Platform means who are you, who's going to listen to you, and how are you going to get on National Public Radio?
Yeah, it's just the way it goes. But for nonfiction, it is easier to you can sell something off that proposal, and Kenan's proposal had kind of both elements that are important. It had not only the outline for how the whole book would be mapped out, but it had the sample writing as well. And you need both of those pieces in a nonfiction, in any proposal really, because those are the two key parts to the book.
And what's your preference in terms of pages? Like I would say probably the average nonfiction proposal I see is like 50 to 70 pages. Does that sound right?
Yeah, sure. It's if for a debut writer, 50 to 70, even 100 is good. It's kind of your page count goes down depending on, I guess, how famous you are. That one paragraph proposal I've seen is somebody that everybody in this room would know. So it just depends on your presence.
I would have to say though that more is not necessarily better. I mean, remember, I'm reading 10 proposals a week, and I get these proposals now that are 150 pages long, and I sort of I just don't want to read 150 pages. I can tell in 50 pages whether I'm going to, if they're the 50 the right pages, I can tell if I'm going to want to buy this book or not, or at least I'm going to have the meeting with you. So don't just keep going and keep going and keep going.
And to be really specific, what I've been told with a nonfiction proposal is you want an overview of what the book is about, and then you want sample pages, and then there's something called a chapter breakdown, where you talk about what's going to happen in each chapter, and then maybe a list of comparable titles, and then a bio. So you, Kathleen, I remember you were actually the first person that read the, because you Kenan, you were the first person, the first agent that read the proposal. So was there anything in particular that struck you that made you think this is, because I remember you said this is going to sell, like we were all excited because you were the first person that read it. What about it? Was it the sample pages or the voice, or could you feel the art?
Well, first of all, I felt bad because Kenan was my physical therapist and I was very mean to him.
I'm everybody's physical therapist.
Every time I saw him, I was very cranky, so I was like, oh, I have to read this, and I was like, okay, I gotta be nice now, but it wasn't hard, it was, what was special about Kenan's book, and what's actually very rare for memoir, is that it was a story that I'd never heard before and that hadn't been told, and it was told in a way that I'd never heard before. That's what makes a great book. That's what makes a great memoir, and it is a very, very rare thing, and Kenan has it. And it's also like Wendy said, the voice. It's just, you feel like you're talking to your best friend. It's very relatable. It's
We lay down these sort of commands. This is what a book proposal should look like. It should have the following parts to it. And everything that Susan says is true. But the last thing you want to do is create a proposal that looks like every other proposal, and it has all the predictable. I mean, there are proposals I can read. I can tell you with the next page, here comes the marketing plan. They're going to do this. Be original and make sure that you communicate the following things: who you are, what kind of voice you're going to be writing in, why anyone should listen to you about this story, why anyone should listen to anybody about this story, and what it is that has driven you to write this story. Why you, as opposed to me or anybody else in this room. What's your connection to it? Was it something you heard when you were a child? Was it a book you pulled off the shelf? Was it a fateful encounter? Whatever it was that set you on the path to writing this book inalterably, you have to figure out how to communicate that in a few pages, because that's all you're going to have. You're going to have a few pages really to capture my attention. And if those few pages are pages 147 and 148, you're in big trouble.
And of course, the thing that makes a proposal special is just when there's just something about it that you can't describe that speaks to you. Everybody in this room knows what that feeling is. When you've read something and you want to tell everybody about it, you can't stop thinking about it. And that was there in Kenan's proposal, and that's not something that there's a formula for. But that was there.
Actually, when I do a lot of events, the two things that editors and agents say when they read material, whether they're going to buy it, is number one, they have to fall in love, and the second one is a very New York thing, they have to miss their subway stop. Which is good. Okay, so I teach writing and journalism, and I'm always saying 3 pages can change your life, and when somebody says you need a platform, I always say, well, you can get yourself a platform in 3 pages, and that's what Kenan did. So do you want to talk a little bit about, he was a physical therapist. What did you say when I asked you about writing? You said the only thing you ever wrote were
lab notes and chemistry labs.
And so talk about the 3 pages, because really the 3-page piece that it ran in the New York Times Magazine Lives column, and then it was picked up in the International Herald Tribune, and then William Bowman picked it for the Best American Essay. So that really, and then you were on a radio show, so really 3 pages gave you the platform. Could you talk a little bit about how it felt writing it?
First one was the first email we sent, and they said yes. So I said, well, it's pretty easy. The reason I'm bringing it up was I wrote another piece about, which became a prologue in our book, called Marshall Tito in Queens. It was a bar designed to bring all different Yugoslavian factions together, and chaos occurred. So I wanted to write about it, and it took 5 months to get it published.
Did you say it took a kidney?
Yeah, I sold my kidney to get it published. So 5 months later, we can't sell it. I don't know what to do. It sits in my computer.
Oh, wait, and I kept saying to him during this time, I kept saying, let's make it timely, and he kept saying to me, stubborn male macho Bosnian, there's nothing timely ever. It happened in 2009, there's nothing timely ever.
Then I was texting my brother from work, and she said, what are you doing? I'm like, nothing, just talking to Eldon about a 20th anniversary of the war. She's like, what? When's that? And I said, it's Thursday. And she's like, oh my God.
I went home and emailed this piece to the editor, who said, okay, it's Thursday or Friday, and then edited it, and then it ran in the hard copy and the online version of the New York Times. But so, but it was pretty quick in terms of once you decided that you wanted to tell your story, you really got a platform and
I mean, it was first became like a personal matter, but to me it was more like obligation to tell a story, not for me, but for my people, anyone who's been persecuted because of religion, nationality, ethnicity.
And actually, if you don't mind, one part of the book that I love is I kept asking you about Schindler's List, and you hated the movie and you didn't want to talk about the movie, but you wanted, when I kept bugging you about it, you want to talk about what you remembered, because that really led to the title and the edit.
Yeah, because we needed an arc, so, you know, she told me we can't end the book hating the world. I understand the arc.
You can't start hating the world and end hating the world, and there's been no emotional change whatsoever.
So when I told about the movie, and I remember my mom in 1995, when I told her, my mom said, you should remember the good people too, and I'm like, yeah, you can go on to the earth, Serbs.
Well, your mom said that it was his mom's favorite movie, Schindler's List, and she felt that it was your story too.
Your story too, which I mentioned in the speech. And I told her, fine, you honor the good Serbs, because I can probably count all the Serbs on one thing that helped us. So I was telling Susan stories, so she told me, why don't you go home and think how many Serbs did help you?
Like, because you had told me the whole story, so I said, I want you to write a list and go through the book again, go through everything we've written, because I remember
and we talked about these people, like we came across people. So interestingly, we started with a list of 12 people I was going to confront. Then we came with a list of 12 people in the end that actually ended up saving my family. Some were civilians, some army officers, and one even war criminal.
And that was something you didn't know when you started writing the book.
Maybe I didn't
You
want to
know
know.
this was in you.
I didn't want to know.
You didn't know that was in you.
Yeah.
No, in fact, when we talked about it at the beginning, he's like, there's never going to be an arc. I don't like this arc thing.
I don't like the arc.
Forget the emotions. I don't know how I feel. Stop asking me how I feel. There's no arc. There's no change. There's no forgiveness. And I remember that was such a breakthrough. And also, this weird thing would happen while he was finishing the book, which is he would have dreams.
In the right sequence for the book.
In the right sequence for the book. Can I get you the latest dream? Can I embarrass you?
Sure. There's the whole world was everybody.
He had a recent dream right as we finished, right before he was going on the book tour.
So the dream was, I was back in Briscoe, but this time with Susan. And she, I mean, you're going to come across these belligerents in the book. One of my former friends, they'll call me and I can see they're grown ups. They're like, Kenan, come here, we're going to play marbles. It's a little game they play in dirt. And she looked at me and she said, don't look at them, don't get in a fight. Your mom is waiting in the apartment. So I go up to the apartment and I see Nancy, my best friend's mom, and it's her birthday. But then my mom comes out of a bedroom and says to Susan, thank you for helping me write a book.
Oh.
So I had like three mothers, one
I
Jew,
analyzed it.
one
I could shriek. I'm like, your Christian mother, your Muslim mother, and your Jewish mother all came together to say congratulations. All right, so we're going to open it up for questions. So yes, and you can ask it to one person or to everybody. Yes.
Why do you think these people that you and your family knew turned against you? Why do you think they did that?
Well, we were told because we were different from them. But it's a very broad story. It's propaganda, nationalism. They were our next door neighbors. And to us, it seemed that they turned on us overnight. But after writing the book and revisiting the homeland, I realized who these people were all along. So the war either brings the worst or best things out of you. And unfortunately for some people, the war allowed them to be who they are.
Well, and the external story that Kenan told me was that, or the propaganda was that they felt threatened because the republics of Yugoslavia were breaking up. So they were scared and threatened, and they felt like almost like they blamed Bosnians for causing a civil war because they were leaving Yugoslavia. So that was the external reason that they gave, even though I think nationalism.
It's pure nationalism. I mean, it's been there since 1841.
Well, did the prior history of the back and forth between the different groups have something to do with that?
Yes, I mean, it's, like I said, it started out in like 1840, basically, when Serbian Academy of Arts and Sciences started their path towards like Greater Serbia. So every 50 years there was some kind of war there.
Although Tito
Tito
got
kept
the
all
peace
the
for
idiots
50
in,
years.
yeah, he kept the peace 50 years because he
He
kept the
basically
nationalists
got
at bay.
released by the force of personality.
Exactly, but
It's a country that was
he had no
stitched
plan.
together.
But he had no plan B. So when he died, all these nationalists came to power, and all we have to do is pack a bunch of buses, go to rural areas, and that's where the trouble came from. He didn't come from major cities; it came from mountains. So.
And also, we talk about this a lot in the book, but also Milosevic was kind of the Hitler of the Balkans, and so there was this huge charismatic, evil character who blamed, used the Muslims as a scapegoat, the way that Hitler used Jews as a scapegoat for everything that was wrong with the country. But other questions? Yes.
First of all, thank you for writing this book because it's very personal to me. My boyfriend is an ethnic Muslim. Actually, his mother was a crypto Jew, and his father was Muslim, and he had to get the rest of his family to the United States during the war, his daughter and grandchildren, etc. I've been to Sarajevo, where he's from. It touches me very personally, so I'm thanking you for the book and for the personal viewpoint of it. But I'd also like to ask what's going on today in Bosnia. Obviously, the three-state solution is going up in smoke as we speak, and there seems to be another cataclysm brewing. And do you have any idea what's the next phase?
Well, the roots of social unrest, they go back to the peace accords in 1995 when the war was ended unjustly and we got the raw deal. Even though it was very noble from President Clinton, Americans to stop the killing, however, it rewarded service with genocide by allowing them to keep the lands they ethnically cleansed. So as a result, you have two states, two separate governments, 180 ministers, 142 municipalities, and 10 counties. In each one, you have a separate police, administration, and court system. Now, like any other country, majority rules. In Bosnia, it's not the case. In Bosnia, if you have Bosniak and Croat who vote in favor of releasing whatever the law might be passed, if the third side vetoes it, it doesn't go into effect. So that's why they can never ever apply for European Union because they can't meet any of the standards. So we don't want three-state solution. The solution is unify the country, get rid of the entities. Last week I was in Dayton, Ohio, and I spoke to a couple of the mayors who were there during the peace treaty and peace talks. And now they said they feel embarrassed. Every 5 years when they commemorate it, they feel embarrassed because they realize they had no idea who they dealt with. And they think in 2015, the 20th anniversary, they want to nullify it. Basically put a ton of pressure on Serbia because they're the ones to blame for everything. So they have to keep their hands away from Bosnian Serbs, otherwise they shouldn't get into the European Union. And really pressure all the leaders on all three sides in Bosnia to give up the power.
And it's interestingly, it's 45% unemployment. And why don't you tell him that you had the revelation you had? For so long he was so upset because he thought that the war and the Dayton Peace Accord sort of ruined his life, but more recently...
For me, actually, in retrospect, it was the best decision. Because, as I mentioned before, it's my mentors, classmates, and principals, and people helped me achieve that American dream where I finish school, I have a job, and my boss treats me for my hard work enough because of a political party, or part of what my name is, or what my religion is. In fact, people are more interested in you if you are come from a foreign country.
Other questions?
Yeah, actually I was going to ask a question that you've just sort of begun to answer. Could you have written this book if your family had not ended up in America? Or obviously you've got a lot of support in a sort of way in terms of writing, but what was it about the context of both indifference and caring that made coming here different than, say, ending up in Germany?
If I was in England or Germany, I would say England. This would never be published. Bosnia's not really fond of English because of their relationship with Serbs and how they were pretty much our second enemy after Serbs during the war. And I have friends who live in London, and they came and published an article that's semi-anti-British. There's no way that book was extremely provocative. I mean, it's very unfiltered. And the only reason I was able to is because of these three women. So they should be thanked.
Other questions? Yes.
This is unrelated. How long did it take you from start to
about a year. Like every morning, evening, lunch, weekend, I was on the phone, texting, meeting.
It was probably from when I first started doing physical therapy for about 6 months. I think he was just doing essays. We were just doing essays, and it was, you fix my back, I'll fix your pages, was basically the deal, and he did it, which was sort of
That's why it
miracle.
took so much time to fix her back.
Oh, and he actually at one point, because he was trying electrodes and heat and like all these fancy things, and he actually bought me a Mars pen so that I could edit.
The pen was running out.
Yeah. But so for about 6 months he was just writing essays, and then he met agents from WME who were interested. So from the time that they said go until the time that we finished the book was a year. But then, you know, once you finish a book, it takes a long time to come out. I would say from when you finish a book until when it comes out, a year would be a short amount of time. Wendy, what would you say usually from the time?
We like to have at least 9 months from the time that we're finished with the book, not the time that the manuscript first hits my desk, but when we've actually been through all the rewrites, everybody's satisfied, we've all signed off on it, it goes into copy editing. It takes us about 9 or 10 months, not just for the physical production process of going through the various stages of proof, but for the publication process, the creation of the jacket, having it listed in the publisher's catalog, accounts, the salespeople sell the accounts 6 to 7 months ahead of publication schedule, arranging the book tour. All of these things take a lot of time. We can do it in a very short period of time if we absolutely have to. We hate doing that. It's expensive and it's not for the health of the book. So I know there's always impatience. I finished my book. Why is it going to take you 9 months? You know, I could get it printed at Kinko's for 3 months. Go right ahead. But it just takes that long to really bring it to a boil and have it be fully cooked in the whole presentation of the book, not just its physical production.
And Kathleen, if you don't mind, I know that working with agents on other books, that sometimes somebody will send you a proposal or somebody sends you a book, and it might take 6 months for you to go back and forth and even to get it into shape to sell.
Yeah, I mean, 6 months would be great. I've been working with writers for over 2 years, you know, who we're still going back and forth with. It's we like to go to publishers with, you know, the strongest version of the manuscript. You only have one chance to make a first impression. And that's a really important part of the process, and that can take even longer than the publication process itself. It just depends on the book.
But other questions? Yes.
It's such a fascinating story. Are you going to do more with this story and more with Bosnia? Or are you working on other projects? Is that a fair question to ask?
Yeah.
There is a character in the book whom recently I found. He lives in Austria, and I Skyped with him, so I'm trying to find a house for his essay to be published.
Wait, is that Shapiro?
Yeah.
Well, tell him about there's
There's
somebody in jail. That he's
there's a guy in Denmark. He's serving 18-year-old sentence. It's actually coming out a year and a half from now. So they're like really heavy connections. I've been sending letters that they've been getting back to me, but I found out through a judge that he's in there, and so I have a couple questions for him.
Can we tell him what?
No?
Other questions? Yes.
When's the book coming out?
One day at a time.
Yes. Okay.
How did you, how did you choose which memories to write about? You talk about having so much anger and resentment as a sort of source of where your feelings about the war was coming from, but was there, you know, what was the glue to the web of
process of writing? Susan will always stress God is in details, and so there are a lot of themes that I left out. She said just because something happened doesn't mean it's important. So we kind of followed that guideline. So she told me, she taught me like do's and don'ts of writing, and there's always a rule with, you know, each paragraph. You know, you want to bring the reader into your mind, totally have that person immersed, so they can feel those sensual descriptions of touch, feel, smell.
What was great too was that since he started writing essays, I think he altogether wrote 6 or 7 essays, and in an essay, I always feel like my favorite essays revolve around one scene, one confrontation, one scene, one drama, conflict, tension. And so what was great was he already had 6 or 7 written. And there was an editor who was interested in the book at one of my seminars when Kenan was telling him about this scene that happened at Marshall's in Queens, where he was hanging out with former Yugoslavians. Tell him a little bit about the Marshall's piece.
The Marshall piece, it was a bar meant to bring all different factions together, music and food. And I've never been to a Bosnian bar prior to coming to New York. So I was enrolled in Bosnia. So it lasted about 8 months. Up in the air, and people were stabbed, and the place was closed. And during the book seminar, when I threw the pitch out to an editor, he said, if you write a book, that should be the chapter 1. You should start right there.
So it was actually a perfect place to start because he's like an American citizen, 30, hanging out at a bar, like, and he feels like he's home, you know. And he was telling me some of the most, just some beautiful lines already, like, you know, he smelled the apple strudel, which reminded him of his mother's. And oh, and he had this great line: "I'd never kissed a girl from home because he was 12 years." Because he was 12 years old when he left, and he and his brother Eldon were hanging out. He'd never gone to a bar in Bosnia, just hung out with the guys. So that became the first chapter. But so in a weird way, the essays kind of wound up helping us with the structure a lot because they all revolved around one scene or confronting one person.
The book has a complicated structure because it exists in 2 time frames. There's the narrative of his life at 12 and his escape with his family, and then there's the contemporary narrative that begins in Queens and when the decision is made to go back. And so we had alternating chapters of the present and his journey back with his father and his brother to Brečko, and then the construction of the narrative of their escape. And so we had a lot of challenges to make sure that nobody was confused at any given moment what the progress was, and they converge, of course, at a certain point.
Good. Yes?
I read the book. It's fantastic. It's so important. So thankful for you. When you flip-flop between being a boy and being an adult, I just noticed that the voice was really strong as the kid, and the voice really strong as the adult. Did you do this? Did you write essays as a young boy, like in that voice, or how did you get to a place where you went back so many years?
2 things. I have a memory of an elephant. Like, I can remember conversations, and it's the way Susan would ask me questions. She would say, what were they wearing? Where was your mom sitting? What was your dad? What was the color of the clothes? And I was totally immersing myself into the past, like almost like a time machine. And I would just close my eyes and see the whole film unfold. They always came down to questions. I would follow the rules. Okay, this 12-year-old, how do you feel as a 12-year-old? Sometimes I would come back and write something, and she would say, I think now you're coming out of your 12-year-old's brain, now you sound more like 30. So you really have to go back, erase everything you know, and just think, what did you know up to age 12? And how did you mature and start learning?
I don't feel anything. I don't know how I feel. Stop asking me how I feel. What is this with feelings? Who cares about feelings? Yes.
So, you know, with this book, how do you think it's affected your relationship with your family? I mean, it must have been pretty tough going back with your father, and I mean, has it brought you closer to your family? Or
it was awesome, by the way. Eldon Trebinčević, who's a really important character, is here. The brother, fantastic brother, who got I actually remember Eldon had the best reaction ever because he read the book and he loved it, and then he said he couldn't believe that he never knew that Kenan felt any of this, which I thought was amazing.
Yeah, we don't really, we share stories of people we hate. We don't like discuss feelings about things, especially at the dinner table. I remember the time he found out that my favorite teacher held a rifle to my head. So I remember he texted me with like big caps, what? Like in English. And then him coming up the stairs and he was sweating as if it happened like 5 minutes ago. He was furious. And I'm like, what do you mean telling him? Like, I told you guys would never let me go outside again. Buy bread. So
I remember when I said to you, why did your family, during the war, why didn't they ever ask you how you feel?
So they're too busy telling me to duck.
We have time for a few more questions. Yes?
In terms of the writing process, you know, every writer has those like, oh shit, I'm stuck kind of moments, and you just kind of want to give up. And seeing as this is so deep-seated and emotional, did you have those moments? And if so, how did you get through them?
Did he get stuck? Did he have writer's blocks?
No, I really wanted to finish it. Like I said, really, I felt like a mouse in a maze where every time I read a story, I needed to find my way around it. And I told him, like, I can't screw this up. She said, no, I'm the one you want. So I just like, kept going. Like, I would be on a subway and think of a scene, and I'll be texting myself. I would be out in a bar with my brother, and he used to get so annoyed. I was to go outside for 45 minutes, and he's like, you and your phone. I'm like, yeah, I'm like, playing the next scene, and the next day I'm just copy pasting. So any free minute I had in the shower would come out wet, dripping. I don't need to picture that about
Any other questions? Yes.
So you feel pretty uprooted. And I think that's a shared feeling that all of us Bosnians had in America and growing up in America. So it's just sort of this aloofness. Does it help to put it all in writing and go through it all over again?
Well, I felt when I went back, I recaptured the 12-year-old that I left. So when you go back, you still feel that age. You still feel that boy who was kicked out. So now I leave at age 30, let's say 33, at my own permission. Like I'm not being kicked out. So when I went back, it was really important for me to come back when I wanted and not feel like I was kicked out. And of course, yeah, I mean, I got an email today from someone from Bosnia. She said that your words are weapons we never had and we always wanted. Your success is our success, and thank you for telling us our story. And another girl whose father was my father sent me a Facebook message yesterday saying that she couldn't remember at age 4 clearly what was going on, but while reading my book, her memory started to come back, so it had helped her come to terms and pave the roads of how she was, but she can't remember because her parents don't talk about it.
Didn't you say that it's changed you? Like you said that Eldon said that it changed you emotionally writing the book?
Am I more laid back?
Stop fighting.
Oh, no, I wasn't fighting like physically fighting. Like arguing like I have to be right. I did like be right.
Good. Any final questions? Yes.
In one of your chapters.
Jimmy, I told you you can't ask me questions.
I read the book. In one of your chapters, you described how it was with being with your family in the apartment, and how you couldn't let anyone from the street know that you were living there. So you had to close the blinds. You didn't have any electric lights. You had to hide basically for months. And I'm wondering, as a child who was 13, how you made sense of that, because your world was turning upside down on you. And how did you deal with that? And did you feel a terrible anger that, like, what is the rest of the world doing to help us? You know, while this inhumanity is going on, where is everybody to save us?
Well, I thought I would wake up the next day and put my kimono on and go to karate practice. Part of me thought that this has to end. Another part of me thought, man, this is cool. I get to crawl on the ground and it's dark and there are bullets, but it wasn't cool when I stepped outside and got beat up. So there are different emotions running through your head, so it was like a perpetual cycle. We waited for someone to help us, but we didn't have TV wasn't working, so we couldn't watch any of the international news agencies.
There was a great change in the book where Kenan was always upset that certain his cousin Amala and certain family members didn't come back for him and didn't stay in touch. And you want to talk about when you met Amala and asked her a lot of questions.
Well, I mean, of course, we're like cut off. They were a couple miles down, but it was a big difference. And my issue was, how come they didn't ask us to go through prison exchange? But there's so many logistics that it was never going to happen. But I was the one that had it easier in the United States in college. For me, I had more money to contact her than vice versa. So, I came to terms with that.
When he met her and started talking about her, it was almost like all of a sudden he realized, wait a second, I had it worse than she did, and I should have kept in touch with her. Like, I think there was a lot of that in the book, right? Like, as an adult going back to write it. What was that line you read from Joe Diddy in the
I read to find out what I think. That came to be true for me. I had a lot of aha moments through the book. I'm like, oh, that's what happened.
Got any final questions? Yes? Oh, Joe?
Yeah, it seems like, I haven't read the book yet, but maybe you covered this. It seems like the bad guys all had guns and none of the good guys did. Why do you guys arm yourselves? Why
Okay.
not you guys
Well,
personally, but I mean,
okay.
why couldn't
Long story short, in 1 minute, it's a long history because you're going to read in the book.
Okay.
Think of like Yugoslavia having all these weapons and all these republics breaking up. At one point, Muslims and Catholics don't want to be part of the Yugoslav National Army. So Milosevic says, great, I get to keep all the weapons from all the republics. It's not that it was stronger and bigger because they were smarter soldiers, because they got the hands on all the guns. I mean, period, that was it. So we didn't want to serve the army, and it's the same army that attacked us, so they attacked us with their own weapons, with their own money. And then when the tables of the war turned, in 1995, then, you know, certain Western countries came and said, well, now you guys have to stop because you're actually winning, which we're never going to get over that.
Would you have any suggestions for the Israeli and Palestinian negotiations?
Actually, by the way, we talked about this a lot. Jews and Israelis were extremely sympathetic to the Bosnians because of the Holocaust. So, you know, and he and I have actually talked about this and written about it a little bit because, and a Jew and a Muslim writing a book together. So we actually talk about it as a book of healing. And I always say that the place it should start is where Kenan and I started, which is respecting each other's pain, understanding each other's pain. So I actually think that it's, and we're going to do events like an interfaith, a bunch of interfaith events. But we found a lot of common bonds, I think. Good. Let me just ask Katie and Wendy. So we all know that publishing is in a difficult place, and ebooks taking over, and we lost borders and all that stuff. So what are the obstacles of doing a book like this? Like now that it's out, because I know unfortunately, a lot of times a book comes out, you spend so many years on it, and then it kind of disappears. So what are the obstacles, do you think?
Well, I think you put your finger right on it. People say, what happens when the book comes out and it gets all these bad reviews? I said, bad reviews I would welcome. It's silence is the enemy. And, with the demise of book reviews, with the noise of everything else, how do you make anybody find out about a book? I don't have a solution to that. I say you have to do everything you possibly can. Whatever, when an author says to me, should I say, whatever it is, yes. The answer is yes. Go on Facebook, go on this radio show, call your college roommate's husband, who has a column in Los Angeles or a column in Toledo or wherever. Whatever it is you can do to reach out as much as you can, because you actually have a lot more weapons than you used to have because of the internet, because of blogging, because of the kind of the virality of the way our culture works. It works for you and against you. You can reach a lot more people, but their attention spans are shorter, and everybody else is yelling at them too. So all of those things are possible. People talk about this being a terrible time in publishing. I can't read all the good books that are published. Good books are published every day. Books like this and 1,000 others that you haven't heard from. Read, talk about them, share them with your friends, leave them in the basement of your building, whatever it is you do to circulate books around. E-books are not the enemy. E-books are people reading too. And I think that's, I welcome that. I welcome any avenue of exposure.
And think about it this way: the way you used to buy books is you go to a bookstore and you ask somebody, what should I buy, and that actually informs your buying decision. You look around at what is in the bookstore, and that informs your buying decision. Now, when you go online, when you go to Amazon, are you browsing for any random book? No, you know exactly what you want to buy. It's just a very different process. That being said, there are success stories, and we're seeing one right now with Kenan's book, and it's a beautiful thing to see.
Thank you. Well, listen, we're really excited that everybody came, and we're going to be signing books over here. And also, Kenan and I are going to do about 20 events in a row in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, Washington, Michigan, LA, New Jersey, Westport, Connecticut. So please, thank you guys for coming by a book, and we'll give out flyers. And thank you again, by the way, for Kathleen and Wendy.